Joplin, Missouri, May 22nd, 2011, 5 p.m. The city is quiet, as it usually is on Sundays. The weather is warm, the air thick with humidity. Suddenly, in a matter of minutes, the sky goes pitch black. As if instantaneously, the city has been plunged into darkness. The wind picks up, as does the rain. All of a sudden, debris begins to fall out from the abyss. Pieces of homes, businesses, vehicles. Then you hear it. The roar. The rain curtains swirl, the wind picks up. Within seconds, you are overtaken by the tornado. The sound of 1,000 freight trains barreling around you in a cacophony of screeching metal and 200-mile-per-hour winds. You are in the twister. You were one of thousands that day caught in the midst of what would become the most devastating tornado in modern U.S. history. The twister would flatten hundreds of blocks, destroying thousands of homes and leaving 158 dead. Devastating the city of Joplin, changing it forever. But wait, let's rewind.
This is going right in the heart of Joplin.
That morning, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk for much of the Midwest and southern Great Plains. Joplin was included within this risk area, but the primary tornado threat was initially forecasted to be further north in the upper Mississippi River Valley, where a 15% significant tornado risk was outlined by the Storm Prediction Center. However, conditions were far from lacking across southwest Missouri. In this region, three distinct air masses were present. Firstly, a warm, humid air mass out ahead of a dry line, which included areas in and around Joplin. Secondly, a warm but dry region left behind the aforementioned advancing dry line. And lastly, a slightly cooler air mass behind the cold front. All three of these air masses came together near a center of low pressure, known as the triple point, where a heightened chance of the initiation and development of severe thunderstorms exists. At 1:30 p.m., the Storm Prediction Center would issue a tornado watch for much of the area, noting the potential for explosive thunderstorm development and a strong tornado or two. And indeed, sounding data collected a few hours later would show that the atmosphere in this region was incredibly unstable, with ML Cape values in excess of 5,100 joules per kilogram being present in the area. These high levels of potential energy would quickly fuel the rapid development of thunderstorms, with satellite imagery depicting rapidly developing thunderheads near the triple point, just as predicted. Strong low-level wind shear would lead to rotations soon developing within these storms, allowing them to mature into formidable supercells. Of these supercells, one in extreme southeastern Kansas would become increasingly intense as it entered into an atmosphere primed for tornadic development. This storm would soon begin producing severe hail and strong wind gusts, triggering a severe thunderstorm warning as it approached the Missouri border. At 5:09 p.m., the National Weather Service would identify an area of rotation near the city of Baxter Springs, Kansas, moving roughly due east, leading them to issue a tornado warning for areas ahead of the storm, which included portions of the Joplin metropolitan area. However, over the course of the next few minutes, another cell moving southeast would merge with the storm. This merger would disrupt the rotation within the cell, leading to a temporary weakening of the rotation within the storm. Yet, the National Weather Service would issue another tornado warning for the Joplin area at 5:17 p.m. This temporary weakening state would not last for long, as by 5:29 a defined area of intense rotation had redeveloped just outside of Joplin, as the merger between the two cells concluded. To get a better understanding of why this happened, we must first understand that cell mergers have a history of increasing tornado risk within storms. While mergers can cause rotation within a storm to weaken, under the right circumstances they can also lead to dramatic intensification of a storm, and have been known to precede many intense tornadoes. This was likely what happened with the Joplin supercell. Weathermen on air and Joplin news stations would be caught off guard by the rapid re-strengthening of the storm, as within minutes a largely boring storm would morph into one of the strongest tornadoes of all time. At 5:34 p.m., the tornado that would go on to tear through Joplin would touch down near the intersection of J.J. Highway and West 32nd Street, in the far western portions of city limits. Within mere seconds after touching down, the twister would coalesce into a massive multi-vortex wedge, right as it entered the city. Around this time, Joplin television station KSNF would capture the tornado live on their tower cam as it moved through town.
Galena area, that's where kind of that inflow is. In fact, right outside of the KSN studio here in western Joplin, we can kind of see those clouds rotating, and it looks like between Joplin and Iron Gates is going to see that rotation as well. Right now we don't have reports of a confirmed tornado on the ground, but we do have National Weather Service personnel stating that Galena has a public report of a funnel cloud. Public report meaning that one of their train spotters hasn't seen it, but there's our tower cam.
That would appear to be a power flash. That could be from a lightning strike, but that is the portion of the storm that we have been concerned with.
Tornado sirens once again.
Tornado sirens once again going off in Joplin. Those are definitely power flashes that we are seeing on the ground.
On our tower cam.
Absolutely, and
once again, this is producing a lot of precipitation. If you go outside, you may not be able to see it. Take shelter now. It looks like this is a pretty powerful tornado. You can see that it was taking out those transformers.
Absolutely.
It continues to push off to the east in Joplin. A very dangerous situation. Once again, very dangerous lightning, some very large hail in store also. So continue to take cover from this storm. We can see that tornado on the ground from our tower cam. We are continuing to track that. We're off. Everything goes.
No, it is certainly going off. Caitlin, I'm just looking out the door right now. Please do not go outside and try to track this storm, folks. You can't see anything outside. It is rain wrapped. This is a
Shortly afterwards, KSNF and every other TV station in Joplin would be knocked off air, leaving many Joplin residents in the dark as the strengthening twister inched closer by the second. The tornado would immediately begin to produce significant damage, toppling numerous trees on the west side of town. Several subdivisions in between West 26th and West 32nd Streets would suffer direct hits from the tornado. Here, dozens of homes would be damaged or destroyed, and many vehicles would be thrown and tossed about. As it moved further into the city, the tornado would undergo rapid intensification and dramatic expansion. At this moment in the tornado's life, it would directly impact St. John's Regional Medical Center, one of only 2 hospitals in the Joplin area. The building would suffer immense damage. Nearly every window in the facility would be blown out, and significant structural damage to both exterior and interior walls, as well as the roof, would also be documented. One of the hospital towers was reportedly shifted 4 inches off of its foundation, and concrete parking stops in the hospital parking lot that were rebarred into the asphalt were torn out and thrown. Many steel support beams on the side of the building were severely mangled and distorted, looking more like crumpled balls of metal in the twister's wake. National Weather Service surveyors noted that vehicles parked outside of the hospital were crushed and even flattened, and in some cases were wrapped around trees, mangled beyond recognition. 183 patients and many more staff were in the building when the tornado struck. Due to the twister knocking out power to the building and the failure of a backup generator, 5 patients on ventilators would lose their lives. Only a few minutes after touching down, the tornado was already producing EF5 damage. 4 people were also killed at the nearby 501 Elks Lodge, where just hours prior a crowded bingo night event had been held. After striking St. John's and the Elks, the twister would grow to nearly 1 mile wide and was approaching peak intensity. Greenbrier Nursing Home, just east of St. John's, would be leveled. Roughly 90 residents and staff were in the building at the time the tornado struck. 21 of them lost their lives. It was the deadliest single-building death toll in a tornado since the 1987 Zaragoza F4 killed 22 at a school ceremony. Subsequently, St. Mary's Catholic Church and School, located between 25th and 26th Streets, would be nearly flattened by the tornado's winds. In the end, only the steel cross in the front portion of the church remained upright. In the vicinity of nearby McClelland Boulevard, rows upon rows of houses would be decimated, in some cases only bare slabs remaining. The tornado would remain steadfast as it crossed 25th and 24th Streets, hitting Joplin High School head-on at around 5:40 p.m. The high school's graduation ceremony had occurred just mere hours before the twister on the nearby campus of Missouri Southern State University, only 3 miles away from the high school, ending just prior to the tornado entering town. Sections of the high school were completely obliterated, and a school bus adjacent to the building was tossed on top of a garage. Security footage within Joplin High School captured the tornado as it tore through the campus. Cameras record as trees around the building were knocked over by winds well in excess of 100 miles per hour. Debris would ricochet through the hallways, bouncing against the walls as windows and doors were knocked out. Ceilings would come crashing down as the center of the vortex passed over the area, alongside many exterior walls. Other buildings and homes in the surrounding neighborhoods would suffer similar degrees of damage, as violent winds approaching EF5 status would descend upon the city. Pieces of cardboard would be embedded within the walls of Joplin High School following the twister, and steel beams formerly found within the building were embedded into the ground in adjacent fields alongside pieces of fencing, flung like bullets into the soil. Homes in this area would be swept from their foundations in some cases, with damage being particularly intense in between Main Street and Iowa Avenue. Nearly half of all deaths within residential structures occurred in this quadrant. Several apartment buildings nearby would be flattened as well, as would a bank. The entire bank would be destroyed, except for the concrete safety deposit box, which would stand strong and remain standing. Not every concrete structure would be so lucky in this area, though. A large wooden 2x4 would be found impaled into a concrete curb along a nearby neighborhood street. By this point in the twister's life, it was completely rain-wrapped, in part due to another cell merger that had begun along the southern portion of the storm, obscuring the mile-wide twister in a black shell, making it completely invisible to those in the path. Despite the fact it wasn't even 6 p.m., streetlights across town would come on as night-like darkness would encapsulate the area, disguising the violent vortex hidden within. Shortly after crossing Connecticut Avenue, the rain-wrapped behemoth would strengthen to EF5 intensity as it slammed into the Rangeline Road commercial district. Large, well-built buildings, including a Pepsi distribution center, a Walmart, and a Home Depot, would be erased from the map. Winds in excess of 200 miles per hour would scour asphalt from parking lots and roads and would crush vehicles left behind by shoppers sheltering in the area. Some vehicles that had been parked in front of the Home Depot were found deposited on the ground hundreds of yards away. Manhole covers that weighed more than 100 pounds in the area were torn out of the ground and thrown several feet, and numerous trees would be toppled or debarked. Numerous fatalities would occur in this area, largely due to the number of shoppers sheltering in the district's stores and businesses. The twister would continue eastward, slightly weakening back to EF4 status as it struck East Middle School. Like at Joplin High School, surveillance cameras would capture the twister as it tore through the building, destroying it within minutes. The cafeteria roof would cave in, collapsing onto the seats and lunch tables where hundreds of children had been sitting days prior. The auditorium would be covered by pieces of ceiling as pieces of debris would fly around the exterior, creating sparks as metal fragments collided with concrete support beams. Most of the school was destroyed. The tornado would produce one last area of EF5 damage in a nearby industrial park where several warehouses would be obliterated. A Fast Trip gas station and convenience store located nearby would see a similar fate. Packed full of worried motorists, they would shelter together in a dark, cramped beer cooler as the building was destroyed around them, capturing it all on video as it happened.
Everybody get down, low on the ground.
Where's it at?
What? What? Okay. Yeah, I know.
We go in the cooler?
Everybody, go.
Heavenly Father, Jesus.
We're good. We're good.
It's okay. It's okay.
I think we're gonna do it. I know. I love everyone. I love everyone, man. Yeah, I love all you guys. We're gonna be okay. I love you.
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Heavenly Father. Thank you.
Guys all okay? Yes. Go, stay down. Is everyone okay below me? Right here, I'm okay. Alright, I'm trying not to lay on someone.
Somebody's on my back.
After striking the fast trip, the tornado would make a right turn to the southeast and would begin to gradually weaken. However, the danger was far from over. I-44, one of the busiest highways in the country, lay directly in the twister's path. Packed full of stranded motorists caught in the storm, cars and trucks would be tossed and flipped in the pitch-black darkness by winds in excess of 140 miles per hour, left to the storm's mercy. One semi-truck driver passing through Joplin that day would be one of these unfortunate motorists. His dash cam would capture the view as the sky suddenly went from day to night within just a few minutes. Sheets of rain pounding down on his 16-wheeler as strengthening winds rolled in from the west. Barely able to see, and most other cars in the area sitting still on the road, he would do the same, just as the tornado struck. After crossing the interstate, the tornado would continue to weaken, falling to EF1 intensity as it struck mobile homes and forests in rural portions of northeastern Newton County. At 6:20 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the tornado would finally lift, just outside of the city of Diamond. It left behind a path nearly 22 miles long, and almost 1 mile wide at its largest. 158 people were killed, over 1,000 were injured. It was the deadliest tornado on American soil since the 1947 Woodward, Oklahoma F5, and the first since the 1953 Flint, Michigan F5 to surpass 100 deaths. According to FEMA, over 8,000 homes suffered varying degrees of damage. The Red Cross estimated that almost 25% of Joplin was destroyed. The tornado caused $2.8 billion in damage, making it the costliest in U.S. history. Among those who lost their lives in the tornado was Christopher Lucas. Christopher was the manager at the Pizza Hut on Range Line Road. As the tornado struck, he ushered nearly 20 colleagues and customers into a small walk-in freezer. After encountering difficulties with closing the door, he'd tie a bungee cord around his arm, holding it shut in an effort to shield the others from the tornado's winds. The twister ultimately proved too strong for his grip. He, along with the door, were sucked into the vortex. Thanks to his efforts, though, everybody else in the freezer survived. He left behind a girlfriend and 3 children. His last words to his girlfriend, uttered over the phone a few minutes prior to the tornado, were, "I'm gonna bring you home pizza. I love you with my whole heart." Will Norton was a small YouTuber who had a passion for filmmaking. He had just graduated from Joplin High School a few hours prior to the tornado. He planned on attending film school in California later that year. He was driving home from his graduation with his father when the tornado struck his vehicle, taking his life in the process. He was 18 years old. His memory lives on in the form of a baseball field in Joplin that was named in his honor, and several scholarships bearing his name at both Joplin High School and Chapman University Film School, where he was planning on attending. His YouTube channel today has nearly 20,000 subscribers and almost 3 million views. Among these tales of loss were also stories of survival. Harmony Baptist Church was packed full of members of its congregation when the tornado struck. 3 people would lose their lives, but 53 others sheltering the building would survive, largely due to the efforts of church administrators who were able to get everyone to shelter minutes before the tornado arrived. The event is known by some in the community as the Miracle of Joplin. The church has since been rebuilt, bigger and better than ever. 3 crosses made of bricks that formerly made up a portion of the old building stand within it as a memorial to the 3 churchgoers who lost their lives that night. The 501 Elks Lodge, which you may remember was completely destroyed relatively early in the tornado's life, also has a memorial within it dedicated to the 4 individuals who lost their lives within its walls on that fateful night. It, too, was rebuilt and continues to serve as a community center for the residents of Joplin to this day. Multiple agencies have performed studies on the high number of fatalities caused by the Joplin tornado. The city had ample warning, and sirens sounded in the city an astounding 20 minutes prior to the twister entering town. It was determined that societal issues, such as the desensitization to siren usage due to high number of false alarms in previous years, was to blame for the heightened amount of deaths. Many people didn't seek shelter until secondary confirmation of the tornado's existence arrived, such as seeing it in person or on television, which most people were unable to do due to the rain-wrapped nature of the twister and a catastrophic power failure around the city that knocked all TV stations off air. In the days following the twister, countless other buildings would begin the process of rebuilding, as the city's residents would begin to pick up the pieces of what had been lost. Thousands of people from around the country would descend on the city to aid in the cleanup efforts. Among these groups were representatives from Home Depot. As you may recall, the Joplin Home Depot on Rangeline Road was destroyed by the storm. To pay back the community, Home Depot set up a makeshift store outside of the former building to help serve the community in their time of need. During these cleanup and recovery efforts, over 3 million cubic yards of debris would be placed into nearby landfills, enough to fill an entire football field with debris 120 stories high, taller than the Empire State Building. FEMA also had a sizable presence in the city following a disaster. Immediately after the tornado, they would send nearly 1,000 employees into Joplin to aid the local government in dealing with the catastrophe. Largely due to their efforts, 15 temporary housing sites would be constructed around the city, providing shelter to nearly 600 households who had lost their homes on May 22nd. Notable figures such as U.S. President Barack Obama would tour the damage path in the wake of the twister as well, providing words of hope and speaking at a memorial ceremony during his visit. As cleanup efforts would commence, the butterfly would become the city's symbol, a sign of recovery and strength in their time of need. Pictures of these butterflies can be found throughout Joplin, from the many murals scattered around the community to the parks and memorials made in honor of those who lost their lives on May 22nd. The first artwork in the city that featured the butterfly symbol was a mural called The Butterfly Effect. Dreams Take Flight. Hundreds of children and other volunteers would work on the piece, dedicating it to friends and loved ones who perished in the storm. The mural depicts the darkness of the night the tornado struck, gradually fading into light and color, the calm after the storm. Bulldozers and cranes can be seen scattered around the landscape, rebuilding the city up from the rubble. And then finally, a rebuilt Joplin in all of its glory. Like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, it was the perfect metaphor for those in Joplin who were just beginning to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Many looked to it for hope, and within days, similar memorials were constructed around the city. Makeshift memorials like this one were erected at locations where individuals lost their lives, and additional pieces of public art such as this were also painted. Like a butterfly taking flight, within a few years Joplin had rebuilt. Although the physical damage had been erased, mentally many of those impacted by the twister were still far from recovery. 18 people in the city committed suicide in the months following the tornado, and in the subsequent year after the disaster, domestic violence calls would rise dramatically. Alongside being a symbol of hope, the butterfly was also used by many as a coping mechanism to deal with the traumatic events they had experienced on that fateful day, and the mental health challenges they faced after, particularly children. Dozens of children interviewed in the months and years following the tornado would report having seen angels hovering over them as the tornado passed over, or escorting loved ones up into heaven as the vortex moved past. However, children who lacked a religious background often describe these beings as butterfly people, and thus the butterfly imagery took on a greater meaning. These stories inspired the creation of a mural titled 161, which depicted 161 butterflies to represent the 158 killed by the tornado, and 3 additional individuals who lost their lives during the cleanup efforts following the twister. Amidst the cleanup efforts and growing issues relating to mental health within the community, suffering would still find additional ways into the lives of people in Joplin. Cutaneous mucormycosis, a rare and sometimes deadly fungal infection, would infect several of the tornado's survivors, particularly those who had acquired injuries in the twister, injuries that oftentimes would have been otherwise easily survivable. The disease ravaged those it infected. Symptoms ranged wildly, but in severe cases included necrosis of the skin and swelling of the face. 18 people in the city would be infected. 5 would lose their lives. Alongside this, large levels of lead contamination would also be detected across much of southern Joplin in the wake of the tornado. Nearly 40% of yards in that portion of the city had some sort of lead contamination, caused by the tornado kicking up bits of lead that had previously been laying in trace amounts beneath the soil or in buildings. Remnants of lead smelters that previously had been a common sight around Joplin during its 20th century industrial heyday. Despite these additional hurdles hurled at the city, Joplin would remain steadfastly strong. Medical officials within the city and beyond would quickly get the mucormycosis outbreak under control, preventing additional infections. Though the cleanup of the lead-contaminated areas would take much longer, the city would spend over $5 million on decontaminating the area. Thanks to their efforts, lead levels have mostly returned to normal. Most of Joplin has been rebuilt since May 22nd. Empty lots are still scattered around portions of the tornado path, but most of them have been redeveloped into new businesses and homes. Federal officials warned those in Joplin that they could lose 25% of their population in the years following the tornado. But the city would prove them wrong. Roughly 5 houses a week would be constructed in Joplin in between 2011 and 2022, allowing those who had lost their previous homes to return to the city they loved. In the 2020 census, 9 years after the twister, data would find that the city had not lost 25% of its population as previously predicted. In fact, they had gained people. Just like a butterfly taking flight, Joplin had emerged from the rubble better than ever, ready to start anew. Joplin will never truly be the same as it was before the tornado. Its residents know that. Nothing will ever replace the homes and loved ones they lost that day. But the city has entered a new era, an era of prosperity and resilience in the wake of disaster. Joplin doesn't want to be remembered as a tornado town. It wants people to remember as a city that built back better. The city that wasn't defined by one disaster, but what came after it. On the Butterfly Effect mural lies a quote from Joplin native Langston Hughes, one of the most well-known poets in American history. While short, it tells the story of Joplin well. It reads, "In time of silver rain, the butterflies lift silken wings to catch a rainbow cry. And trees put forth new leaves to sing in joy beneath the sky." This has been Overcast. Thank you for watching.